Thank you so much for being with us, Jide. So I wonder if you could begin by telling us a little bit more about yourself, just kind of your background and yeah, what you do and that kind of thing.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. Well, my name is Jide Macaulay. I'm a priest in the Church of England, and I'm also the founder and the Chief Executive Officer of House of Rainbow. I studied law. My first degree is in law. My second degree is in theology, and I also have a postgraduate certificate in pastoral theology. Yeah, I was raised in a Christian conservative family. But at the moment, I'm doing a lot more for House of Rainbow, which I'll talk a little bit later. I am 56 years old. I am one of 5 siblings. So
that's a good little introduction, potted introduction to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's great. And so maybe you can now tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with, well, you started House of Rainbow, didn't you? So tell us a bit about how that happened.
Absolutely. I mean, House of Rainbow started in 2006, and we're still going on pretty strong more than 15 years later. And one of the reasons that House of Rainbow started was because I was having a lot of challenges when it comes to my sexuality and my religious beliefs. The fact that, too many times, I have been told that I'm an abomination, or I've had, that, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people have been told they're an abomination unto God. And to be quite honest, initially, before I was able to get to start in House of Rainbow, it was a huge problem for me. I was excommunicated from several church communities a few times. And that's when I began to think, there has to be a place where gay people can be accepted. And of course, on top of that, there's also the whole rhetoric and narratives that, homosexuality is an abomination, Black people cannot be gay, Africans certainly cannot be gay. So, and it's not like I wanted to test, this narrative. I just felt that there has to be something needs to be done in order to address those narratives and actually change those narratives. But having been through my own challenges as well as a gay person, I came out as gay after I was, married to a woman in a heterosexual relationship. It didn't work out. And then I started to explore the opportunities around queer theology. And I particularly wanted to find a way to reconcile that with also being Black, because every time I'm seeking, answers, I'm always finding things that maybe support the notion that, being gay is a white people's thing. So, for example, when I first found the church, I was introduced to the Metropolitan Community Church. And the MCC church in London was very much white. So I still began to think, okay, this doesn't help me at all. But I soon realized that it really doesn't matter whether you're Black or white, you are still a child of God. It was out of that experience and for the training that we started House of Rainbow. And House of Rainbow started in Nigeria, so I might be able to say a little bit more later, but it started in Nigeria in 2006. And then, of course, things didn't work out well, so I returned back to England, and then we continued the program or the organization here in the UK in 2010.
Have you? I was just on a Zoom call this morning with somebody actually who works in this area in West Africa, and I was just wondering if you'd come across him. He's called Davis Makiala. You come across him? He's got another different organization.
I know about Davis Makiala. Yeah, he is the executive director of I think it's Interfaith Network.
Yeah, Interfaith Diversity Network.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I do know. I mean, he's also Nigerian as well. So I do know him. He's also Anglican, but he's not an ordained clergy in the Anglican Church. Yeah. Okay.
So have you done much work with that group, across the House of Rainbow, and because I guess you cross over a little bit if you've been
we do cross over. We haven't particularly done any work in any form of collaboration, but we have worked in the same precinct. So I think it was either 2020 or last year, we worked together supporting communities in Liberia, training religious leaders on reconciling faith and sexuality. And of course, there are membership organizations that also bring us together. For example, the Global Interfaith Network or the Pan-Africa International Lesbian and Gay Association. So there are parallels, but we haven't actually had the opportunity to work together on some of the issues. But I think that his organization is based in Ghana. And of course, recently, he made a statement to the Ghanaian Parliament on the pending on the proposed bill that is presented to the Ghanaian Parliament, which is an enviable work. So I do acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were talking about this morning, really.
Okay.
And also Lambeth Conference that they want to send some people to, and that's so. Yeah, I just thought you must have crossed over because it's similar kind of work in a similar area, yeah. But I'm sure there's, like you say, there's other organizations as well in that area. So.
I mean, I don't think that one organization can do all of the things that we want to do. And that is why I'm also very proud to be a co-founder of the Global Interfaith Network, which actually is an umbrella organization for LGBT led faith communities, so of various traditions, of course. But I think that what is also important is that, House of Rainbow focus mainly on supporting LGBT people, particularly of Black and ethnic origin, on reconciling faith and sexuality. It is very difficult because sometimes there could be an overlap or there could be an extension of the work that we do. For example, is House of Rainbow an activist-based organization? The answer is actually no, but we do encourage, activism, on an individual basis, and of course, maybe as a group. Is House of Rainbow an asylum-seeking led organization? No, but there are people who use our services who are people seeking asylum, whether in the UK or in other countries, but we are quite clear that we will support people when they're going on that journey. So, but I think that the main focus of House of Rainbow is actually helping and supporting people on their journey of reconciling faith and sexuality and creating safe spaces for them to be able to continue to experience that. We do not want to take away the expertism and the professionalism from the other areas. Another good example is that House of Rainbow supports, Black men who have sex with men who are living with HIV. We have a robust peer support program. But then again, we are not an HIV-led organization. You see, there's so many examples I can give you.
Yeah, I do. And that's really good work, important work that you do. And you've got a website. If people want to find out more, they can go to your website, yeah?
Absolutely. The website is houseofrainbow.org. And people can go there and find out a little bit more about what we do.
I'm just kind of going back to something you mentioned about the queer theology that you had got into. I wonder what kinds of, I know this is a later question, but what kinds of queer theology, just as you mentioned it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of queer theology, it's really about queering the Bible, helping individuals and collectively as well to understand of our own existence in scriptures. And, there are books like Take the Word Back, the Queer Bible Commentary, Lost in Translation. I mean, these are just, books that have really helped us, to begin to help to focus our own journey and understand our own narrative. But what I'm really, really interested in, honestly, sometime in the future is actually how do we queer African theology in itself, because I think that is one of the most detailed area. But there is actually an author that I like so much, Adriaan van Klinken. He's a professor of African theology at University of Leeds. And he has written so many books and so many articles about Africa and being queer and being a Christian in that kind of genre. So for me, it's really important. I want to see more Black Africans write about Black African queer theology. But at the same time, queer theology for me also stems from liberation theology, Black theology, African theology, because within those concepts of theology, you also begin to understand, the queerness, the theology of queerness in itself. So, but of course, also primarily is also to work with people where they are at. So we're currently running some, training program and studies, what the Bible says in favor, what the Bible really says in favor of same-sex relationship. The topic in itself is deliberate, because if we left it like the Bible and homosexuality, it doesn't say much. It doesn't tell queer people that they can come to this program. So we were very clear and very deliberate. And of course, we actually got to that point by listening to feedback, over the years. I mean, it's a program that we started just about the time that the organization started as well, more than 15 years ago. And we continue to provide access to those studies and communication as well, so that people know that they can find those information, they can have access to them.
That's really important.
Yeah.
So this person that's writing in Leeds, could you say the name again? Adriaan?
Oh, sorry, say that again.
The professor, did you say at Leeds University?
Oh, yeah, Adriaan van Klinken.
Van Klinken.
Yeah.
K-L-I-N-K-E-N. Okay, correct. Just so that we can share that then with listeners.
Yeah.
That's great. And I'll look him up. I don't think I've heard of him before, so that's.
He wrote a book called Kenyan, Christian, and Queer, which was published, I think, last year or so. He's been part of, if you just check his name, he's written so many books. He's edited so many African queer theological books. I think there's also a documentary, that followed one of the books and the people that were chronicled in that book. So yeah. That
sounds like a really good person for people to check out and read more about.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the next question, but what is your experience of being a queer Black person in the UK and in the church in the UK as well?
Well, there's no doubt that both of those kind of identity often are problematic, being Black and being queer in the UK and also in the church. Now, I was born in London, but I was raised in Nigeria. So by the time I returned to London, I was in my late teens or early 20s. And it was the first time that someone on the streets of London said, "You're a Black man." No one told me in Nigeria that I'm a Black man. I was just a Black person, period. And of course, that was when I started to experience racism. And sometimes there are blatant racism, sometimes there's subtle racism. And things right down to you don't speak English well, right down to you got speech impediment because you have an accent. So I think that, of course, being queer and being a Black person in the UK have its own challenge in itself. Now, let me unpack them a little bit more. Being Black in the UK is an experience of every Black person. So whether it's good or bad, you will get an experience about the color of your skin. Now, being queer is more of a double challenge, simply because we still live in a society, even in the UK, where being queer is not acceptable, but more so within the Black community, being queer, being gay is not acceptable to a large extent. So that in itself is very challenging. So then when you start to think about being part of a religious community, it is difficult. And I can tell you this, when I first came to England from Nigeria, I practically immersed myself in the Nigerian community, and I was going to an African independent church, which is very much Nigeria rooted in this country. But of course, when I came out as gay, I was immediately excommunicated. That was the first time I had to deal with this issue of being excommunicated from church. And that hurts. And there's no doubt about it, that so many people were affected because I came out as gay, after I was married to a woman, so because all of those challenges were there. But having said that, it didn't just end with that one church. So when I came out of that church and I was excommunicated, I took time out. It wasn't deliberate. I just didn't have anything else to do with myself. I didn't understand what most of the challenges that I was even facing. But I knew that I had a relationship with God and I want to develop that relationship. Now, the reality is that there was a time where I continued to, there was a time I was living a double life, even after I came out as gay. So on one hand, I was very comfortable with being gay. And on the other hand, I was getting comfortable with being a Christian. So I decided to look for a Christian community where I can continue to flourish as a Christian. But what I then did, was that I kind of like hide my sexuality in the Christian space. But of course, in the gay spaces, I also try to hide my Christian identity. So it became a problem to me because I have to try to remember what stories did I say to the Christians and what stories did I say to the gay people? And I have to make excuses as well. So if a group of Christians from the church were visiting my home, I have to make sure that my home doesn't have, anything that will give away my sexuality. And of course, my gay friends were not that difficult, but I just don't bring up issues around religion when I'm with my gay friends. But I think that, it became more problematic for me because at some point it was causing me a lot of challenge. I needed to be able to free myself and be able to talk about being both gay and a Christian. So my experience of being queer and a Black person in the UK and the church, it goes on for a number of years. But this is also the time where, in the second church that I went to, when they finally found that I was gay, again, I was, on this occasion, I left because I was subjected to conversion therapy. I was subjected to a lot of prayers and healing. None of it worked, but again, the humiliation, was quite intense. So my relationship with that church tradition ended, based on that. But then this is also when it took me a couple of years before I then discovered the Metropolitan Community Church. From that moment onward, I had a journey of reconciling my faith and my sexuality, and I've even gone one step further, to train with the Church of England as a priest. So, but of course, my relationship with the Church of England also faced a number of challenges. So, even beyond being queer and being a Black person, in the Church of England, I have faced homophobia, racism, xenophobia, and I've also been largely discriminated against because of my HIV status. So you can imagine that, you run towards the church for sanctuary, and that is where you get the most abuse from. But one of the things is that, I stay strong and resilient because I have a better understanding of my relationship with God and not just the church institution. So just to give you an additional context to that, in 2019, I actually did a documentary on BBC Primetime. The documentary is called, Am I Too Gay for God? And the question in that documentary is really, because the Church of England have a legal clause in the Same-Sex Couples Act of 2013 that allows the church to legally discriminate against gay and lesbian people when it comes to marriage in the church. And I felt that it's unfair. So of course, the documentary was actually challenged that, because if I was in a relationship and I want to get married, I cannot get married because the church has been allowed to legally discriminate against me. But of course, if I then go into a registry to be married under the same law, the church would then fire me from my vocation. You see the dichotomy of that. So that makes it really difficult being queer in the church. And of course, thankfully, being queer in the UK is more relaxed. I'm of the older generation that was impacted, by the 1969 clause, Sexual Offences Act. You understand me? I was impacted by that clause 28. So I was impacted by many things, don't ask, don't tell kind of mannerism, but also impacted by the fact that we have organizations and religious organizations promoting conversion therapy. And that is why I'm actually part of the voice, to bring a ban on conversion therapy today in the UK so that we can stop this an inhumane practice against the queer community.
Yeah, I saw that House of Rainbow signed the letter to support a full ban.
Absolutely. I mean, we didn't just sign. I mean, House of Rainbow was part of the convening conversation. So there were 4 organizations that started the conversation, and then it certainly grew. So I think at the moment, that there are signatories of almost about 3,000 people signed a signature asking the UK government to ban conversion therapy.
Yeah, and that's...
We're talking faith leaders, religious leaders.
Yeah, that's it. We're talking faith leaders, although I think now it has been opened up to just Christians generally, but yes, about 3,000 faith leaders signed it so far. So that's great. That's really good. And it should be properly banned. It's an abusive practice. I know some people personally, not just you, but other people in my life who've been through it. So
absolutely.
Lucky I didn't ever go through it, but yeah. And moving on to this one here, what's the stereotypes, the kind of damaging, harmful stereotypes you think that society holds? I guess UK society, really, I'm talking about. Which is harmful to queer people of color, queer people, and
I think the reality is that it's not just people of color, but just to be very much clearer, within the communities of Black people, like I said earlier on, homosexuality is not easily acceptable or tolerated within the Black community, and the Black majority churches kind of support that as well. So it means that if you're Black and gay anywhere in the UK, you are more likely to be subjected to homophobia, not just within your community, but also within your religious communities. So the stereotype is that homosexuality is not for Black people. Homosexuality is an abomination. You cannot be gay and African. You cannot be gay and Christian. And I think those stereotypes are pretty wrong in itself. And because they've always been, this, message that, sexual relationship is between a man and a woman within marriage. That also means that, if queer people don't have marriage that is sanctioned by the church, then it means that as the, LGBT people's sexual relationship will continue to fall outside, those teachings. And that is why it is important that we now have a voice to readdress this, anomaly, and, to begin to take back the word and begin to say to queer people that, your relationship is valid, in the presence of God, and is also valid under the law of England. But unfortunately, we cannot walk down the aisle of the church where many of us grew up, where many of us are part of that community. So the stereotype still maintains the fact that, queer people cannot have a family, and that, LGBT people are not responsible. And I think these are very, very wrong notions. I mean, even coming from religious spaces is very, very wrong.
And do you think things are changing in the church, in terms of, including in the Black majority churches? Do you think things will change and things are changing and attitudes?
I mean, I wouldn't say categorically that things are changing, because we still need very much of a miracle for the whole thing to flip over. But I think that the reality is that, the church has come a long way. And I strongly believe that the institutional church has now realized that this subject of human sexuality is not going to go away. Now, the other stereotype is that, the moment you say you're gay, the only thing that people think about you is what sex are you having? A gay or lesbian person is often considered a deviant or even a pedophile, and that is wrong in itself. And I think that the church is changing, in my opinion, because there is actually more conversation around human sexuality, and even if not all of them are totally positive, the Church of England, for example, recently rolled out what is called Living in Love and Faith. This is a course of study that people need to engage with. And even the course of study is not overtly pro-LGBT, but it's a good place to start so that LGBT people will know that, these conversations are taking place and that we can also contribute to this conversation to make it even better. But of course, when we're also talking about, banning conversion therapy, but I would like to see more about comprehensive sexual education within religious communities. I would like to see more training at theological centers. When I trained as a priest in one of Church of England's training center, there was not a single module or even a continuing professional development kind of course around human sexuality. I think that's a failing of the church in itself, or the institution in itself. We need to do that more work. Just as we've done a lot of work around race relationship, we need to do more around sexual orientation and gender identity. So I still feel that, the stereotypes are there. They still harm people because, there are many conversations that I've had. For example, heterosexual people, they live their life without even noticing that, they're living their life. So for example, if a man and a woman hold hands, or maybe at the bus stop or at the train station, they're parting ways and they exchange affection in that moment, honestly speaking, 9 out of 10 times, nobody will notice, nor will they bite an eyelid. But if that happened between same gender individuals, it is almost as if that, there is a spark plug that is gone off. There is this illuminating light around them. Oh, wow. Oh, 2 men are holding hands and kissing whilst they're parting ways. And I think we need to build a society that everything can actually blend. And this is why I believe in strategizing around destabilizing heteronormativity, so that we can have a society that's more unified, around human sexuality, so that, people will see that it's okay and accept that it is okay when people show affection, whether, well, of course, especially those in public. But of course, there are laws, that allowed same-sex people to have private consensual relationship behind closed doors. Can you imagine? This question is, who's policing all the things? But the reality is that, even now the church is evolving. But needless to say, the Anglican Church still have regulations that are not legally binding, that still questions and query the sexual activities or the sexual or human sexuality of LGBT clergy. And I think at this point, I think that's still very wrong.
Yeah. There's a lot of different standards still. And, at the heart, it comes down to having a view of human beings, which is different levels of how good you are and how human you are, basically.
Absolutely.
So it's theologically very problematic. You either believe it's okay and you treat everyone equal, or and everyone is beloved of God, or yeah. It's kind of a weird. They've got a weird tension of being in the middle, but actually theologically that makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, to be quite honest, we can insist that theologically it is difficult, but I think that there is also a pathway to make that theological experience easier. And that is by listening to the experience of queer people themselves. I don't think that queer theology is something that can be developed or understood by people outside of that community. And that is why, a book that was edited by Ruth Hahn, the Queer Prophet, the Book of the Queer Prophets, is the testimonials of many queer Christians. And I think for me, and when we start to speak out on our own issues, it is so important. And also alongside, people like Jarrell Robinson Brown, who had written a book about being Black and queer and a Christian in Britain. And I think for me, that is also about us speaking out on our own issues and letting people recognize that, LGBT people are not a freak of nature. We are just as equally and adorable and fearfully and wonderfully made by God. We need to try to begin to understand the context of our own humanity. And it comes better from queer persons. And I've always said this, with a lot of pride, that, being an openly Black gay priest also means that I can provide culturally appropriate and traditionally sensitive pastoral care to other Black, gay, and queer people. And I think that's really important. And we have to enable that, especially as we're trying to find what is the theology for queer people.
Yeah, I think you've actually touched on something incredibly important there. And that is that if you block certain people from priesthood, as the church kind of has for a long time, and in some ways, in more subtle ways still does, and kind of you can't get married, or, it's much more difficult if you're disabled to be a priest, etc. Maybe it's not a complete barrier, but there's still barriers there. And what happens then is that, like you say, not everyone is supported pastorally the same as everyone else. Yeah. Because to be supported pastorally by someone who understands your situation and your experience of life is really, really important. Yeah, thank you. That's made us think.
Yeah. So I think you're very right, because, in the 1980s and maybe a decade later, when HIV was very rife and was absolutely terrible illness, there were a lot of people that were barred from ministry just because they were HIV positive. But today it's different. We have, I'm a member of the International Network of Religious Leaders Living with HIV. And, when it comes to the issues around intersectionality, being HIV positive is not the only thing that I bring to the table. I bring all of my experience. I bring being Black and being gay and being African and being British. I bring all of those experiences to the table. So you cannot minimize somebody based on one thing in their lives.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? That's why intersectionality is so important. And I wanted to do this series to kind of open up that conversation, really, because I think, being Black and being queer is something that's really important to talk about, and or just being a person of color and being queer is really important to talk about. Like you say, people get put in boxes. It's either or. It's but our experience of life is often intersectional, and we have different multiple exclusions in society. So it's really been good to speak to you and previously Augustine Eam and Savi Hensman. So far, that's the three. You're the third. So it's been good. I did approach Jarrell actually, but he's just too busy. I think his life has exploded. He's very popular. So he sent apologies for our series, but he's got too much on. But yeah, I also would recommend his book, Jarrell Robinson Brown's book. Yeah. So why, talking about intersectionality, why do you think it's so important to do theology from the perspective of both sexuality / gender and race, ethnicity?
I think it's very important to do theology from an intersection perspective, because the theology will be informed by people's social location. So, the theology that will appeal to wealthy people cannot appeal to poor people. The theology that will appeal to Black people will not appeal to white people. Rural and urban area and so on and so forth. But I think it's also very important, to recognize that people also need to find their own place in those theology. And I'll give you a quick example. As you know, there are many series or films made by Hollywood, especially around slavery. And you have to ask yourself the question, any film about slavery, who is this film communicating to? Let me just make one example. 12 Years a Slave is an interesting film in itself. But in that film, there were 3 examples that came out of it from a kind of theological perspective. One is the theology of the slave masters. The second is the theology of the bond slave, and then the theology of the free slave. Yeah. And I think that, the way that even scriptures was used in that film was indicative of how we can also begin to look at theology. Slave, obey your masters. It's a different theology that indicates that you will get your reward in heaven, but you have to obey the superior, another being superior over you. But again, it is also important to do theology from where people are at. For example, there is actually the theology of HIV. For example, there are theologies of disability. There are trans theology, feminist theology, queer theology, as we know today. And these are very important because it means that we can find a way that we can connect people, to that grace, of God, to that understanding of God that embodies everybody. Just this weekend, just on Sunday, we had a guest speaker, come to speak at the House of Rainbow's virtual ministry. And, they reminded of Revelation 3:20 that says, listen, the Bible says, listen, I knock on the door. If you open the door and if you listen to me, and if I knock on the door and you let me in, I will come and dine with you, something like that. And I think that text in itself spoke quite clearly. It's very inclusive. But the key word is that if you listen to me, if you hear me and you open the door. So that kind of instruction, that kind of theology requires action as well. It requires action on the part of the hearer. If you hear the knock on the door and you don't answer it, it means that you're not going to get, the guest is not going to come in. If you allow the guest to come in and you still don't want them to eat and dine with you, and so on. So that is why theology needs to embody a full understanding of where people are at. And I think that is very, very key. Of course, race and sexuality, as you know, have a lot of history. If you look at the civil rights movement in the US, the theology that was developed in terms of liberation and Black theology was because of racial tensions, and this is after the emancipation, after the abolition of slavery, we're looking at theology differently. Of course, in the UK, we also look at theology in terms of inclusion. Isn't it surprising that we still have Black majority churches in the UK? And even within those Black majority churches, we have a Nigerian majority church, a Kenyan majority church, which means that, some of these churches also embodies the culture of origin within those spaces. And even though for me, it's actually not necessarily a bad thing, it is important that we understand those theology. And let me close on an example. With my work at House of Rainbow, we support people seeking asylum. And, there was a young person who lived in Coventry, another part of the country. They came down to London, to seek my counsel and support. And I remember, saying to them that, have you asked for your church community in Coventry to support your process of seeking asylum as a gay man? And they looked at me and said, Jide, no, I cannot ask them to support my process of seeking asylum as a gay man. And the next thing I said to them, I said, well, so why do you then go there? Why do you go to this space? Why are you part of that community? And they said to me that, Jide, please don't ask me not to be part of this community because they embody my culture. This is the space I can go to. I can wear my African outfit. I can eat Nigerian food. I can dance to the music, and I'm part of that community. But they are not on the same journey with House of Rainbow or myself when it comes to sexuality. So you can see why the intersection of race and sexuality is very important, because we may not find everything in one place, but we can have an amalgamation of everything that we need. So you take from here and take a little from there, and you know that you found your wholesomeness within those communities. So those are very important if we're looking at the intersection.
Yeah, I mean, people's upbringing and people's cultural background is so important to them, you know, and it just, because there might be one thing that is hurting them in that culture or whatever, it doesn't mean that it's all bad, and you still want to hold on to all the other things. You know, I guess it's similar to a lot of us LGBT Christians, you know, that might have been brought up more conservative and have had to go through that fight, you know, and we still want to be Christian. We still find so much of inspiration and of good in that faith, but we don't want the faith along with the anti-LGBT baggage. I guess it's a bit similar.
Yeah. I think you're very right, because I mean, too often we want to stay in our comfort zone. And, you know, some of the way that I have operated, or let me just say that the Holy Spirit has operated through me, is that I never seem to find a comfort zone. You know, God always takes me through all these challenges. And you know, of course, you know, I mean, like I said, I was raised in Nigeria, so I was very familiar with the country growing up. So when I came to England, I did settle well in England as well. But then, of course, when we started House of Rainbow, I moved back to Nigeria because, you know, I was confident that I would be comfortable in Nigeria doing this work. I left the comfort of England, to be quite honest, you know, when it comes to sexuality, to go to Nigeria. You understand me? But of course, when I then returned to the UK, I was very much part of the Metropolitan Community Church community, which to some extent for me was very comfortable as a gay man who is a minister. But then I was encouraged, you know, through my my spiritual directors and those who mentor me, you know, to seek training with the Anglican Church, because for me, I wanted to broaden, you know, my own ministry beyond the queer community. And seriously speaking, as an Anglican priest today, I've learned a lot. I've matured, I've grown, because it's not always that easy. So I keep on pushing my boundaries, because you know, when we find ourselves in that comfort zone, you know, we then become complacent. We would then relax. But it's so important for us to keep on pushing our boundaries, you know, to find what will benefit our community, what will benefit us as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Jide. That's so helpful. It's been really interesting talking to you. Maybe you can just finish by giving us some names of people that you admire, people to read, anything like that, any resources.
Oh, absolutely.
You'd like to recommend.
It's so funny, right? Because I literally just brought all my bookshelf onto my table here, onto my desk. and the reality is that, you know, there are so many people that I admire, but it's a long list. But let me just start with a few. Certainly Desmond Tutu. The late Desmond Tutu is one person that I admire so much. Beya Ruskin and Bishop Yvette Flonder, Pamela Lightsey, Troy D. Perry, the founder of the Metropolitan Community Church, Professor Robert Beckford, you know, from Queen's University, Queen University, and of course Jara Robinson, and of course I have to add one more, Lil Nas X, you know, the hip hop, the rapper.
Oh yeah.
You know, he's certainly one of the people that have really I admire so much and inspire, because when they released the records or the tracks and the album, it was in itself a message, you know, to the queer community, you know, that I don't think that even the church can reach millions of queer people the way that he did. And of course, you know, books that I'll recommend, it would be What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality by Daniel Heminiak. It's one that I really love so much, and it's because it's readable if you just want, I won't say light reading, but if you want some serious understanding of what the Bible says about homosexuality.
Can you say the name of the person who wrote it again?
Daniel Heminiak, Helminiak. I hope I got that right. Helminiak.
You might have to send me that one. I'm not sure I can get that
No
one
problem
done.
at all. I will find out for you. And of course, Matthew Vines, God and the Gay Christian, certainly Jarrell's book as well.
Mm-hmm.
I some recommend that. And actually, there's one book, the first book that I started with is a book called Pastor, I Am Gay. I believe it was written in the 1980s. And it was the author is Howard Bess. And it was a book that I think Howard was a Catholic priest. This was during the time of the HIV/AIDS pandemic in the 1980s, and they went out of their comfort zone. I was talking to you, to minister to the queer community and also to provide decent burial for people that were dying. And they were fired from their job, as a priest, and it was heartbreaking. But when I was reading this, is one of the books that actually enabled me to liberate myself as well. So there you have it.
It was a very difficult time, wasn't it? And
yeah, I mean, one of my other favorite authors is Paula Guda, and I hope you know she's British. She's written so many books. I currently have her books on the parables that I really, really engage with. And I've also mentioned Pamela Lightsey, and she wrote a book called Our Lives Matter, a womanist queer theology, which I think is so important. She's her writing is from the perspective of being a woman and also being queer as well. Right.
Yeah. And womanist being kind of a black feminist perspective.
Absolutely.
Kind of mixing, black theology and feminist theology and queer theology, I guess, in that book as well. So that's very
interesting. Absolutely. And of course, I mean, for additional reading, I think that the queer Bible commentary is a good one. The chapters were written by several authors, and there's also another book called Take the Word Back. It's actually an anthology, contributions from several queer theologians as well. And of course, another author is Christina Beardsley, an Anglican priest who's a transgender woman who has written extensively and contributed to many.
Yes, I've got a couple. This Is My Body is a good one. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have a copy of that as well. I mean, obviously, I'm taking my time, to develop and read a lot more about this into the context as well of this book. There's another author that I engage with so much. His name is Renato Link. K. He has an initial K. Renato Link. He just released another book called Censorship. Well, I mean, the book that I'm engaged with is called Love Lost in Translation. So, this book is basically, it's basically homosexuality and the Bible. And I mean, look at the size of it.
Wow, it's a big one.
It's indeed a big one, but it's also very, very engaging. But it's something you just have to take your time.
Is it a commentary? Does it go through the Bible? Or is it...
I think it literally just it goes through the scriptures, in stages, and just really doing a lot of work and looking at languages, looking at the translation of those languages, whether it's from Aramaic, Hebrew, and so on. Just looking at all the different translations in itself. So and it actually helps a lot, as the title speaks for itself, Love Lost in Translation. But I mean, the other ones that Matthew Vines' book, God and the Gay Christian, is actually a good place to start. There's another book called The Children of Free that's written by John Connolly and Jeff Miner, who are both gay theologians as well. And I've actually met quite a few of them.
That is a lot of books you've got off the top of your head there.
Listen, I have a library, and this is just a tip of the iceberg. I have a library of books, and
you've got more books than I have.
There's also what's it called now? There's another book that the Gay Gospel, written by what's that name? I didn't pull it off my chair, but the Gay Gospel. I mean, certainly there are some books that I've read that, you know, I didn't totally agree with, or maybe it pushed my buttons for me to maybe rethink. And, you know, there's been a couple of authors that actually suggested that Jesus was gay. And again, you know, if you're querying theology, you know, sometimes it pushes you. Sometimes you wrestle with some of the conclusions that other people are making. Of course, you know, when it comes to the story of David and Jonathan, or even Ruth and Naomi in scriptures, I think theologically they can be read in multiple ways when you think about it today. I certainly believe that, you know, David and Jonathan could actually be heterosexual, they could be bisexual, and they could be gay. You know, so when you're querying the Bible, you look at what are the possibilities. And I think that by denying one group of people, you know, a possibility of that theological understanding, you deny them, you know, their place in scriptures or their place in theology. And the same as, yeah, go on.
I was going to say, have you come across Pearson Toscano? He's a friend of mine. He's done a lot of, he does like acting, play, you know, performance artist. That's what he is. He's a performance artist, but he's done a lot of queer theology in his plays. And yeah, he's got a website, and it's definitely worth checking out, because he's a theologian as well. You know, he does his own theological research on it, and he's done some very interesting takes on people like Deborah, and you know, queer takes on. So, you know, queer, kind of gender queer as well as sexuality. You know, people that do not seem to conform to gender binaries in the Bible. Really interesting. So yeah.
I mean, I just remember another one, maybe for the record. It's called Bible, Gender, Sexuality, Reframing the Church Debate on Same-Sex Relationship by James Brownson. Yeah, it's on my bookshelf somewhere. You know, and you know, I mean, I listened to a number of the lectures. Actually, I attended some of the lectures whilst I was traveling in the US a number of years ago. And it was just so good to know that James Brownson previously wrote a book that was anti-gay, for him to now write a book that is reframing the church debate on same-sex relationship, which is very, very positive. So again, that's so important to understand that. Yeah.
Some people have done a complete about turn on it, haven't they?
Absolutely. I think it's really necessary. Well, I mean, I won't say necessary. I think it's very important, because the idea of theology is to take us on a journey of unlearning and relearning. You know, and that's so important, especially when we know that human lives are at risk. And of course, you know, it's not just the church alone that has the responsibility, also the society. And, you know, a couple of experiences that I really kind of think that the church is lacking, or religious institutions are lacking. Okay, very quickly, in the UK, we have, as of 2017, the United Kingdom government has completely decriminalized homosexuality in the United Kingdom. There is not a single law or provision that punishes LGBT people in the United Kingdom, not anymore. But we still have the behavior and attitude of society and the church against the queer community. So if I have a neighbor that's homophobic, I can just report them. You understand me? I have the law on my side. Now, of course, the other scenario is
except the church. You could argue except the church, which is
except the church, exactly, except the church. But I think that, to be quite honest, if the church becomes very clear around inclusion messages, it will eradicate those who are in the minority on these issues. Seriously. It will destabilize heteronormativity overnight, because I mean, no one is saying that heterosexuals do not exist. But the reality is that do not minimize the existence of other people outside of heterosexuality. And also remember that the argument for heterosexuality is procreation, largely procreation. But even not all heterosexuals can procreate. But you also want to remove the question around pleasure in relationship. And that does not fit in, even with the ideals or the intention of God. And we have to understand that. And
also, you know, we have ways of procreating.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you see, the beautiful thing with theology is that, you know, when you look at the Old Testament writings, it's actually pre-scientific period as well. So when we come into the New Testament, you know, it's much of a relational relationship kind of process about community standing together. That is why Pentecostal movement was very, very popular. You know, for many people that had experience of being Pentecostal, the moment you join the Pentecostal movement, they don't leave you alone. They will call you 24/7. If they don't see you, they're going to call on you and check on you. And sometimes, you know, you think, oh my God, what's this? Can I not have a break? You know, so, but that reality, that community is also very important for many. And the example I gave of someone from Coventry who came to 6 services at House of Rainbow is a good example of the church being part, people being part of a church community. You know, I love the idea of fellowship. There's no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. Let me share the second example very quickly. I was doing a program in South Africa, and an Islamic leader who was part of the training program. There were about 45 people in that training session, and they gave about 3 or more examples of how the Quran instructs them to kill LGBT people. Now, the audience that had to endure, you know, these narratives includes parents who have lost their LGBT children to violence, okay, who have been traumatized. Many have gone to several protests and court cases. But what this cleric said when he finished talking about how it is his religious duty, he then said that the Constitution of South Africa does not allow him to carry out his religious duties. In that moment, you have to then think for yourself, the Constitution or the Quran? I mean, come on. So it makes it so difficult because, you know, as a religious person, you want people to be able to understand that how they interpret their religious text is very important. And in that moment, we were all grateful that there was a constitution that stopped him, you know, from carrying out these hideous religious beliefs. So, yeah.
I spoke a few years ago, it's on our website, on my YouTube channel and everything. I spoke a few years ago to somebody who is a gay Muslim as well. So, I mean, I think similarly to the church, things will change and things are changing slowly. Yeah. But like you say, people have interpreted these things in certain ways for so long. It's really hard to change. And it's caused an awful lot of harm. So thank you for all the work you're doing, Jide, to make that harm less and to heal some of it and to help people along the way. It's been really, really good to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
I'm sure we'll cross paths again.
Absolutely. And you're in Birmingham?
I'm in Birmingham, yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll bear that in mind. Right.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.